welcome to the latest of my deep dive videos. This one into the Mercury Retrograde of the 14th of January at 11:41 a.m. Universal Central Time. Now on the screen now you can see when this event begins in your time zone. Now thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to explain to you in a broad context what Mercury retrograde represents and what we can expect this year. This is the first of 4 Mercury retrogrades. The first 3 begin in air signs and the last one just at the end of the year is in the earth sign of Capricorn. Mercury retrogrades of course have a reputation for causing tangles and snares and mix-ups and delays, and all that is possible because Mercury does govern the transport infrastructure, communications, anything to do with correspondence and technology. So you can see why this may occur. But Mercury isn't actually moving backwards, it just appears to stop, because as we look at it from the Earth, that makes it look like it is going backwards. So it's rather like being in a train station. Your train pulls in, another train comes alongside, and then that other train pulls out, and it feels like the coach that we're in is actually moving too when we're not. So that's basically what Mercury retrograde is like. But Mercury retrograde also offers a lot of opportunities, and I don't think that message generally tends to get out there. So what I'm going to do is share in a lot more detail what this event means, the timeline for all the different key events and aspects and influences. I'm also going to share on the screen the birth chart for this event, but this time I'm going to use a more ancient form of astrology, Hellenistic astrology, using whole signs, because I think that's going to express to you a little bit more straightforwardly how this will impact on different elements or different sections of our existence. If you're new to my channel, I'd be honoured if you would subscribe. Please click or tap on the bell notification symbol. It just means that every time I drop a video, you'll get an alert. Now also, if you are new to me, you can get your free written daily horoscope fired to your device each morning by clicking on the link beneath this video. And also, we're in the early part of this new year. If you'd like to order your 12-month forecast and get a character analysis as well with my special package, you can get 30% off and gain searing insights as to what the next year will hold for you. And it will be 12 months from the time of the order, so it could go into the early part of 2023 now. Now, this particular presentation is going to give you an insight to the natal event, but then please stay with me. I will share an insight for each of the 12 zodiac signs, so you can watch these from the point of view of your sun sign or your ascendant. The choice is yours. So on the screen now, in terms of Universal Central Time, we have the event chart, but in whole signs. Now you can see this means that the first house is on 0 degrees Taurus, and that's because the ascendant for this event is at 12 degrees in Taurus. Now that means that the ascendant and Uranus, the planet which has been shaking things up in the sign of Taurus since full time, March 2019, and for 5 months in 2018, that's very close to the ascendant. So that suggests that we're going to be feeling a lot of restlessness. And also you can see in the 10th house, where Mercury is retrograde, where we get that RX glyph, we also have next to it Saturn. So Saturn and Mercury are very close together in the 10th house of our existence, our connection to the wider world. So I think this event is going to be a lot to do with employment, how we interact with each other, how we gain a living. So things to do with property can also come under much closer scrutiny. But because Saturn can be a more restraining influence on the retreating Mercury, which we know can slow things down around communications, it means we do have to take even more care to choose our words carefully over this period of time. But the square between Saturn and Mercury and Uranus and the ascendant means that our desire to be individualistic, do as we wish, is going to be blocked somewhat by the 10th house energy, which is very much about the orthodox. It's what's expected of us. It's what we're expected to fit in with. So that could be governmental measures, I feel, guidance and rulings about how we live our lives, which obviously some of us find very, very difficult. Many of us find very, very difficult. But you can also see that Venus, which is still retrograde, although I must say that Uranus is about to go direct on the 18th of January, that's actually forging a magnificent link to the ascendant and also Uranus in this universal central time chart based on Greenwich. And that's very lively and very imaginative. And that Venus is also very closely allied to the midheaven. And it's in the 9th house in whole signs. So that's encouraging us to be enterprising, think outside the box, and try to find different ways to connect with our attitude towards money, which Venus does govern. Venus, of course, in the sign of Capricorn is much more serious. It still can be about relationships, but it's retrograde to the retrograde in Uranus, to the ascendant, but the semi-sextile Venus forges to Mercury can be broadly very helpful. Now, what are the other big aspects in this chart? Well, you can see that Pluto and the Sun are very closely together. I also have Juno in this chart, which is the asteroid of relating. The midheaven and then Venus all gathered together in that very orthodox sign of Capricorn. And then, of course, we have Saturn, the ruler of Capricorn, alongside Mercury, what we're talking about in the 10th house, very Capricornian. So that's why I feel that we're really going to see some big impact on financial markets, anything to do with how we earn a living. Certainly there's going to be a lot of scrutiny around property that's going to go on over this next few weeks. And of course, the other interesting thing is that Mercury isn't going to hang around in the sign of Aquarius. It connects with the Sun in a conjunction on the 23rd in Aquarius, which is very humanitarian orientated, brilliant for connecting to our friends. And in that sense, the Mercury retrograde, especially after the Christmas period, is pushing us to wake up and get in touch and reinvigorate our community instincts, if you like, which Aquarius greatly influences. But then on the 26th, Mercury moves back into the sign of Capricorn, because if we go back to the end of last year, it was on the 29th of the year, not 29th of December, that Mercury actually went into its shadow. It's not going to emerge from its shadow period until the 5th of February, and then it's going to go into the sign of Pisces on the 10th of March. But it will come back into the sign of Aquarius on the 14th of February. So what I think this whole process has meant is, as last year came to a close, a lot of us were setting our goals, getting some kind of clarity about what we wanted to achieve, and then whoosh, in has come Omicron. Quite a big way, and this is having a big impact on all of us, whether we like it or not. Whether it's a more serious variant or not is not what I'm talking about. It just has had an impact. So it's slowed things down. So as we're starting to think about the future, which is the movement of Mercury into Aquarius on the 2nd of January, and then once Mercury goes retrograde, as it does on the 14th, just as we're getting some momentum going, we're having to rethink in some ways and adapt yet again. But one of the things that this pandemic has shown is just how adaptable human beings can be. And of course, there has been some awful suffering as well. But we are beginning to get more used to all the things we have to do, whether it's, continual testing or washing our hands or being very cautious about our distance from one another, or wearing a mask. It depends on what your personal viewpoint is. You may not relate to some of those things, other people will. It just depends. We're all individual, but Mercury is how we communicate. The other thing to tell you is that when this event occurs, Mercury is at 10 degrees in Aquarius. But did you know that Mercury is exalted in the sign of Aquarius? So it likes being in Aquarius, but particularly in the second decan, the second 10 degrees. And also, another thing to know is that this year, each of the first 3 retrogrades that occur in the air signs of Aquarius, this one the first, second Gemini, third Libra, then roll back into Earth. So Gemini back into Taurus, back into Gemini, Libra back into Virgo, back into Libra. And then right at the end of the year, we do have that Capricornian retrograde, but it's only for 3 days. It's not a full series. So we get a taste of 4 retrogrades this year. So what does that overall scope of energy suggest? Well, I think a lot of discussion around the use of information. I know a lot of people, I was speaking to a client of mine the other day, and we were talking about COVID, and she was saying, well, everyone has a different opinion. But one of the things with Mercury is because it rules the sign of Gemini, which is about information, and Virgo, which is about precision, and it's exalted in the sign of Aquarius, which is about humanitarianism. Put those 3 things together. So logic, facts, information, with precision, discrimination, which is Virgo energy, very strong for, and then the humanitarian angle of Aquarius. You can see they're all linked together. So we need to think about how our thinking, our thoughts, our ideas are all interlinked with others. But I think the earth energy is asking us to stay very grounded and to think about things in a tangible way. So having opinions is one thing. The facts could be influenced by the earth energy we have this year. Capricorn, Taurus, and then Virgo, followed by Capricorn at the end of the year. So however much we all want to express our opinion these days, and we may go onto social media to do so, it all needs to translate back to what is actually tangible. So that's the earthy facts. So for me, those earthy facts are also the pentacles of this tarot year, if you like. So we can think about the swords, which is the Mercury energy through those 3 air signs, but the pentacles is about how it affects us in a practical way. And to use that old saying, it's the economy, stupid. So the economy will be affected by these retrogrades this year. We already have inflationary pressures that are quite strong. So the communication that we have needs to be as crystal clear as possible. And therefore, if we don't get so distracted by the white noise of all the information that's out there these days and keep working on what's important to us in terms of our core values, very much to do with Aquarius, how we link to others, very much to do with Gemini, and how we find balance and relate to people, very much to do with Libra. So you can see that this Mercury retrograde is not just limited to Aquarius. It has a big story to tell for this whole year. Now, I hope that by the end of January, as Mercury aligns with Pluto, that's going to provide a lot of reality. I think on the 23rd of January, as it aligns with the Sun, it's asking us to remember our connection to others, that none of us is an individual person. Somebody's just asked me, has the age of Aquarius really begun? Well, I think for me, in a more metaphysical, instinctive way, I think it really will be when Pluto enters Aquarius to begin with in 2023, because of course it will be a temporary thing because of the retrograde, but it goes in full time in 24. So to me, that's really, Pluto is much more to do with ages. Saturn's much more to do with cycles, but Pluto bigger cycles really. So that's just my personal instinct. Other people will have different viewpoints, but I think that conjunction between the Sun and Mercury on the 23rd certainly could see some big news come into the fore about how we interact with each other. But the reality of the power of the Sun and Pluto as this event begins, being in a conjunction and being in the 9th house, suggests some kind of international potential for conflict where power is used not in a particularly kind or responsible way. We're talking about the imposition of total power where there are no opinions. So, you know, we need to think that we're very, very lucky about the amount of free speech that we generally get. So to summarize, Mercury retrograde is an illusion in a sense, in the physical sense, because the planet just appears to stop from our viewpoint on Earth, but it is still moving. But that's how it's recorded from Earth. And then when that happens, yes, that can cause snags to do with postage, distribution, anything to do with technology, communications in general. We need to be more precise and careful, but it also offers opportunities. And that's one of the things that a lot of astrologers find themselves pushing back against, because a lot of popular magazines and newspapers will suggest that Mercury retrograde is a time just of glitches, but astrologers would say retrograde means reset, realign, reconfigure, reconsider. So, you know, we can gain an awful lot of benefits from Mercury retrograde. It's not just the downside. Now, also another question that comes up, what about if you've got Mercury retrograde in your natal chart? Well, it depends what sign it's in. If it's retrograde in Mercury in Virgo, and it was in the 3rd in Gemini, and also in the 6th house in Virgo, I actually think it would make that person a very effective communicator, to be honest. Might make them a little bit more serious, but much less careless. Gemini energy can be quite whizzy, quick, zip, zip, zip. So the retrograde could slow things down in a positive way. If you have Mercury in another sign, for example in Pisces, that can be more challenging because it's detrimented in Pisces. Also, if you have Mercury in Sagittarius, it would be argued because it's also said to be detrimented here. But that's one of the afflictions that I think is less noticeable, because to me, Sagittarius people are very much interested in information. Perhaps the key there is not to exaggerate, but then the retrograde there would be much less inclined to exaggerate. But in the sign of Pisces, I think that could be incredibly introspective, if I'm honest. And then, of course, in the sign of Aquarius, it will be in its full. A sign of Leo, sorry, it would be in its full. So if you have Mercury in Leo, it's important that you don't let your pride get in the way of your communications. So if you had Mercury retrograde in Leo, that would need some more care. So Mercury retrograde isn't just about you have Mercury retrograde in your natal chart. It's what sign it's in. Also, what house it's in. And also after that, if you have an important influence on it. So for example, if you have the moon next to Mercury in Leo, it could make you someone who's not very in touch with your feelings. Particularly if it was, say, in the 10th house, the pride and the need to be admired would really water down your effectiveness as a communicator, because actually subconsciously the moon here may be wanting to have a lot of credit and praise, and not necessarily will you be connecting with others in such a positive way. If you have Saturn or Pluto, if you have Mercury opposite Pluto, you're going to be an extremely opinionated person, I'd say. And that can have its downside. Or you can have someone who has Saturn in an aspect to Mercury, particularly the retrograde, and that could lead to someone who's quite worrisome, had difficulties with travel, inhibitions with learning, all sorts of things, whether it's a foreign language, if it's in the 9th house or in the 3rd house. It could make someone a very, very detailed and dedicated writer. Please don't see Mercury retrograde as always a bad thing. You have to drill down into the natal chart to really find out what's going on. Now, let's just have a quick recap. So this event sees Mercury conjunct Saturn. Saturn, the planet of restriction. Based on universal central time, the ascendant is Taurus conjunct Uranus. That creates restlessness. So people are going to be restless if there's further restrictions. The 9th house is freedom of movement. So we've got Pluto and the Sun there. Expect some authoritarian instructions about the freedom of movement. We've got to be realistic about that. Venus's angle to Uranus, however, is saying think outside the box. You can turn this to your advantage. Mars is square to Neptune is more challenging. So with that one, with Neptune being in the 11th house in the whole signs, and Mars being in the very sexually orientated 8th house, if you really fancy one of your friends, make sure those lines of communication are crystal clear. So that just about sums up this astrological analysis. Now I'm going to give you the zodiac analysis for each of the 12 zodiac signs. And this is going to take us through to when Mercury ends the retrograde. So remember, the retrograde ends on the 3rd of February, but doesn't come out of shadow until the 5th. So once it moves back into the sign of Aquarius in the middle of February, we're going to see things start to resolve themselves much more in how we interact with each other. But for your individual forecast, here goes with Aries. So for you, Aries, this particular event occurs in your sector of friendship and also of your future plans. So it may be that there could be some backsliding on some of the hopes you've had. Try not to get too frustrated if that's the case. The way Mercury works, and I did predict this at the end of last year, you could make those big plans, you could have those ambitions, those goals, those visionary ideas coming through once Mercury moved into Aquarius on the 2nd of January. But you have to be aware that things could be fluid. In comes Omicron, and we've all had to be more fluid again. So for you, I think essentially with having that conjunction between the ascendant in this particular chart and Uranus in your second house of everyday resources, things could be a bit changeable around how you earn a living and where you earn a living. But the thing I would say to you is do not be tempted to mix business with pleasure too much, not at least without thinking very carefully about whose duties are what, having some formal terms and conditions that you can all relate to, being very crystal clear in any kind of community group or friendship situation, but particularly about money. And when it comes to your own financial forecast, you need at this stage to be pretty nimble and not getting too caught up on the big plan you had. Just go with it. If things do change, don't beat yourself up. We're living in a world which is changing by the very second, so none of us can keep up with it. It's absolutely totally impossible. So all we can do is have realistic expectations and be conscious that maybe you will need to have a plan B or a plan C, and keep just being very open-minded. That cluster of energy that's in the sign of Capricorn for you is very much still about success, and your desire to improve your lot still remains very strong this year. Which brings us to Taurus. Now for you, of course, Saturn and Mercury in the 10th house is very much in keeping with the chart that I shared, because the ascendant is in your sign. So what can we make of this? Well, it could be that you're going to apply for a job. It may be to do it with the travel sector, or it may involve technology, teaching, training, and you've gone through an interview process, but you don't get to hear quite as quickly as you would like, which could be hugely frustrating. Be aware that by the middle of February you will get the answers that you want, and of course with your ruler Venus still twisting backwards, that's an added complication. But Venus is forging a lovely alliance with the midheaven on this particular chart. Your charm, even if you present it in a very earthy, honest way, is something that can still be an enormous asset around any communications. So if you're dealing with a niggly line manager, or you're applying to a new job and you're not quite sure how to come across, well, the old-fashioned courtesy, good manners, can take you far. Which brings us to Gemini. Of course, Mercury is your ruling planet, but it is softened in this retrograde by the fact that it's in the second decan of Aquarius, which is also governed by Mercury. So the big snag for you continues to be that right angle between Uranus and Saturn, and Mercury is getting in on the act. So we have Uranus squaring Mercury as well. So your nervous system could be quite sensitive over the next month. Look after yourself. That's really important. So You know, as you know from my draconic chart, I have Mercury and also the Sun in Gemini, and sleep has been really difficult to come by over the last year and a half. And I'm trying a few techniques, trying to make sure that all the sleep hygiene is really good, you know, that room's well ventilated, as tidy as possible, as dust free as possible, there's plenty of water. Because I have sleep apnea, I have two different types. I wear a mask and have done for about 7 years. So that makes sleep also a bit complicated because the Velcro's always going and all that kind of stuff. And because I've got a very third house natal chart in Placidus with the Sun and Mercury, the ruler of your sign, in the third house, I'm very buzzy myself. So sleep's been difficult. Sleep can continue to be difficult over the next 3 or 4 weeks, to be honest. But what you can do is use the stability of Saturn to ensure that whatever you are working on that is of a higher intellectual basis, that's anything to do with publishing or learning or teaching or travel, if it's possible, to do with a job, that you're really going through the processes in a very thorough, methodical, systematic way. And actually you could turn this Mercury retrograde into something of a triumph. But I do think the sleep and the exercise continue to be quite big strands of commonality for Gemini folk, which brings us to Cancer. Well, Cancer for you, that conjunction between the Mercury retrograde and Saturn is in your 8th house. So a lot of discussion about money, legacies, pensions, insurances, shared resources. So you may even think about changing a financial provider or getting a new mortgage quote. If your deals come to an end, these things can be positive for you because you can use the managerial vibe of Saturn to work with the reflection side of the retrograde to your advantage. It's just that Uranus and the ascendant on this chart are wanting you to be as idealistic as possible. So it's good to be idealistic, but I think with that gathering of energy in the sign of Cancer, collaboration, cooperation are vitally important. Pluto and the Sun are conjunct as this event occurs. If you want to dominate a relationship that's to do with finances, shared resources, business, that may not work well. So it is about learning to use the power of Pluto wisely, and that doesn't mean always getting the final say on things. So just be conscious of that. The other part of it is that, of course, you are an extremely strong sign. You're a cardinal sign, you're a leader sign, but in the past you've had a real disinclination towards conflict. So Pluto can be very good for you in that regard, and saying, look, put your cards on the table, front up how you feel. That's a much more honest interaction. Meet that midpoint rather than withdrawing or trying to control it, which is the more fearful, really, reaction of potentially that can happen with Pluto on the Sun. But I think that conjunction between Saturn and Mercury is brilliant for looking and revising anything to do with that financial situation. Which brings us to Leo. Well, Leo, for you, Saturn, of course, trundles along in your 7th house of relating, and having Mercury right by it, retrograde, means that if there is a chink in a relationship, it's going to show itself over the next few weeks. And perhaps the chink is maybe going to come up about not anything particularly profound, more about something quite workaday. You know, is somebody taking your goodwill too much for granted? I've been saying this for a long time now, that caring, sacrifice inside of your nature. Yes, you have got this reputation of being, you know, liking to get your own way and being very charismatic and using charm to weave your web of magic around you. But actually the truth is that you can be one heck of a giver. And I think the 6th house energy of this chart is saying if you're investing too much in supporting others and they're not really respecting it, Saturn and Mercury retrograde are saying, tell them how you feel. Get on that biting point of pushing back. Don't be too keen to avail to everyone's need and everyone's viewpoint. So if you've got kids, put together a pact in the house. Look, this is what I expect. You're not going to expect them to keep their room perhaps as tidy as yours, but maybe there are certain things like taking the cutlery and the dishes out of their room before they're actually physically growing a mould. That kind of thing, just basic sort of respectfulness. And so if you are really bending over backwards to make the domestic scene work, that could be the point of conflict, to be honest. But of course the sixth house can also be about work. And if you work in an environment where it's all give, not much recognition, I think you could be feeling quite rebellious with Uranus squaring both Saturn and also Mercury. So that may mean this pushes you to look for a new job over the next 4 weeks. Everyone's circumstances are different. We can't characterize it only by the 12 zodiac signs, the sun signs or the ascendant, and that's why I really would encourage people always to check out their natal astrology, because it will give you so much more insight. But you can see, for example, that Mars is in a glorious location for you in your sister fire sign, and it's also in the third decan, which is very much in keeping with your sign, your ruler, the sun. So that's terrific until we get into where Neptune is, which Neptune square Mars can be very, very conflicting and very confusing. So it could be that you fancy someone, but they're really not good for you, or they're not telling you everything that's going on, or they're just bone idle. So quite complex for you, Leo, I would say at the moment. Virgo. Well, of course, Mercury is your personal planet. That it's going retrograde next to Saturn just means that very precise side of your nature has just got to come out and play over the next few weeks. It's just got to. But you, of course, have Uranus on the ascendant of this chart that's resisting the routines and the calibration that you bring to situations. Sorry, your born again Virgoinness is coming out to play, but it can come out in a very creative way, because with all that energy in the sign of Capricorn, you can take your skills, your talents, your enthusiasms, and deliver them in a very, very well ordered way. Big opportunity for you over the next few weeks, I'd say. And that brings us to Libra. So Libra for you, Mercury and Saturn are in the fifth house, very much to do with joy, creativity, pleasure. The big pack of energy in Capricorn, fourth house, how it feels, your environment, the family, where you live. So it could be a time when, with the Mercury retrograde, you're rethinking some things. Are there some hobbies that you have at home that you could take out into the wider world? Because Uranus is in the part of your horoscope to do with long-term earning, and the Saturn-Mercury conjunction are about creativity. Can you find a way to be more passionate about something that inspires you, but working in an environment that feels really comfortable? All that fourth house energy in Capricorn. The choice is yours. With Mars in your third house, a lot of enthusiasm for your ideas, and then Neptune comes along and takes all of that away, because it's very steamy and wet and moist. So you need to use your energy in quite a measured way over this next 3 or 4 weeks, I'd say. If there is a romantic relationship in your world that just isn't working, look, come on, just face up to it. Your tendency to not want to rock the boat, to really think things over and ruminate and put things off. Remember, I'm a Libra ascendant, so I completely get this. Not wanting conflict, wanting to be the good guy, the good gal, that's all okay. But I think Saturn really next to Mercury retrograde on your fifth house, it's really giving you food for thought. If you're not getting the emotional nourishment, all that stuff in Capricorn, you really need, well, I really think you need to confront it. And of course, once you get fired up, your cardinality, because you're a leader sign, is quite exceptional. So use it if you need to use it. Which brings us to Scorpio. Scorpio, Mercury going retrograde in your fourth house, home, family, emotion. Saturn next door, if you decide to work from home, this could work very well, because it's going to see you have the discipline to really work very, very hard to make this a success. Uranus on your 7th house means that this could cause some issues with spatial issues, really. You know, do you need to take one of the spaces in the house away from another resident, such as an offspring? No, you got to share your bedroom with your brother or whatever. I need this for my office. That could cause some tensions, I agree. But with so many energies in your 3rd house, along with your modern ruler Pluto aligning with the Sun as this process begins, and then Mercury aligns with your modern ruler Pluto as January comes to an end, you can choose your words very well during this period, measure them. It's possible that you may be a bit more to the point around sensitive issues like home and emotional issues. If someone's going through the mill a little bit, just be conscious that you could seem a little harsh or brittle with Saturn conjoining with Mercury in the 4th house. Because Mercury in the 4th house, although it's happy in Aquarius and in this part of Aquarius, it's not really the best place in a solar chart transit, because the 4th house is water and emotion, and Mercury is much more into detachment and reviewing things in a more logical way. So yeah, choose your words carefully, but as long as you're clear about what you want to achieve, you can come across with amazing clarity, I'd say. Which brings us to Sagittarius. So we can't ignore the fact that you've still got Mars in your sign, which is great. That pack of energy in I'm reminded of my sister then. She used to say, pack it in to her kids. So that pack of energy that we've got in the sign of Capricorn, very much to do with everyday resources, money, and enjoying the good things in life. But for you, Mercury's in your 3rd house of siblings, neighbours. If you're in a neighbourhood that you feel a bit closed in by, you know, maybe you don't like the people next door, or maybe you feel that it's a bit noisy or a bit too quiet. It just depends on what you want. But Saturn and Mercury conjunct in the 3rd house makes you much more aware of your everyday environment. But equally, it could give you tremendous self-discipline to structure your ideas and express them. It's just that with Uranus in your 6th house, along with that ascendant, work and your nervous system could take a little bit of a hit because of Saturn and Uranus squaring up to the ascendant and Uranus. So those early nights that were important for Gemini are just as important for Sagittarius, to be honest. And also, it could be that you're going to be the one who actually feels this Mercury retrograde in much more of its classically understood way, because having Saturn conjoining Mercury in your 3rd house, which is very Gemini-like, so it could be that, you know, a long trusted mobile phone is finally going to give up the ghost. Sorry, I'm not predicting it will. It could. Or it may be that, you know, you've got some tech in your situation that doesn't work very well, or you don't use, or you've got maybe, you know, my son was showing me a video of his new home the other day, and it's like a wall-to-wall music system in there. And I said, what's happened there? He said, well, I sold off one lot and I got all this lot second hand. Didn't cost me any more, but this is much better stuff. That's the type of stuff that you could do very, very well over the next few weeks. But if someone owes you any money because of Mercury going back into the sign of Capricorn, I do feel that you need to stay on the case. You know, be very vigorous in chasing this down, which brings us to Capricorn. So for you, Capricorn, Saturn continues your ruler in your 2nd house of everyday resources. So having Mercury there suggests that you will perhaps be thinking about money, and maybe you've gone into this new year with a real sense of hopefulness that after the, you know, the 12 or 13 year transit as it is now of Pluto, as that's gone over your sun, and if you've got any planets gathered around the sun, there may have been a time of great change. And I know quite a few Capricorn people write to me and say, when is the suffering going to ever end? What you don't know is that I get Cancerians writing to me, and also Librans, and also Aries people, because you're all on the cardinal axis. And that's why And of course, you know, Pluto has been challenging for Aquarius people as well, because in a very psychological sector. So I think for you, this chart is saying, I really would be a little bit disinclined to be too speculative. So even if you're someone who likes a bit of a flutter, I definitely wouldn't bet any more than you can really afford. If you're someone who's thinking about a new business venture, you want it to be more entrepreneurial this year, good for you. It's not to say it's not going to work out for you, but that idea that maybe developed over Christmas, talking to people, and has gained a little bit of traction, may need some modification. But stay cool. You know, if anyone can work something out so it finally gives a dividend, it is you, because you're a sticker, a fighter, and you find value in situations in ways that other people have long given up with and long got bored with, because you have got durability. So if there is something that you're needing to be a little bit more careful with money at the moment, try to accept that. Your patience is legendary, and that is going to give you your reward. By the middle of February, things will be looking brighter for you. Also, you've got the psychological implication of Mars still stuck in your 12th house and angling in the right angle with Neptune. There could be some gossip around you. Maybe it's linked to your past. Maybe something that you've said is coming back to haunt you. Maybe you are feeling or thinking a lot about someone powerful from your past. It may have had a sexual dimension to it. It may have been someone you worked with. It may have been someone that you found quite tricky to get along with, but you're still processing what the ins and outs of this relationship are about. So, quite complex for you, Capricorn, which brings us to Aquarius. And of course, I've got a lot of planets in Aquarius. So what does this mean? Well, it means that at the moment, there's a lot going on in the psychological part of our situation that does need to be dealt with. The Mercury conjunction with Saturn, which is the co-ruler of Aquarius, is clashing with the higher modern octave ruler of Aquarius, Uranus, in the 4th house. So anything to do with family, home, emotion, lack of space. Aquarians really like space. And maybe it's pushing you to be a bit more organised about the space that you have. This chart is quite complex for us Aquarius people, I feel, and maybe a bit like Capricorn people. There's maybe some stuff that needs to be revised, reviewed, and a sort of period of going backwards, it may feel. But actually, this is just making sure that when you get to the biting point at the middle of February, and also the springboard point at the 23rd of January, when the Sun goes conjunct with Mercury in Aquarius, that's a point where a new beginning can come through. But I think there still could be a little bit of tracing back and then swinging forward powerfully from the middle of next month. So keep the faith, absolutely. Which brings us to Pisces. Well, one of the things I would say to you, you can see that in the whole signs chart, your two rulers are back together, but in the 11th house of humanity. Very idealistic, lovely. Just thought I'd say that. Really, really nice. However, we do have, for you, an opposition between Mars and Moon going across your 10th and 4th house. Is it important for you to balance that work-life scenario? The 11th house energy of Capricorn is saying, look, your connections to others are very important, but you may find that you're a little suspicious or wary, or some anxieties creep into your situation over the next few weeks. They don't necessarily have to be long-term ones, but I think if there are some things that are worrying you, don't bottle them up. Do ventilate them to a trusted person. You know, if you don't have anyone in your world as a friend or a family member that you feel will listen to you, you know, do share any concerns you may have by going onto a help group or a forum, because one of the worst things with Mercury in the 12th house is bottling things up. I've got Mercury in Capricorn. I'm a Aquarius sun, so that makes it in solar astrology the 12th house. So that's why I'm being particularly supportive on this, to, you know, seek out sources of information if you do feel that something's really concerning you. But Also, the conjunction with Saturn and Mercury in its retrograde gives you opportunities, because opportunities to reflect about the type of people you want to be friends with, all that Capricornian energy. And don't give away your kindness and your spirituality and the way that you will go, bend over backwards to support people you really care about. If there are some people who just do not appreciate it, this conjunction between Saturn and Mercury is saying, chop back, set your boundaries. It's really important. It's been a real pleasure being with you. Thank you so much for joining me. Take care and goodbye for now.